Hey everybody, welcome to Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Jack Canfield. As you can see by looking over my shoulder, I am a lover of books. I'm also a lover of really great authors who do incredible books that make a difference in your life, that help you transform your personal, professional, and financial life and make a difference in the world. And today I have a wonderful guest who does exactly that in all those different areas. His name is James Sheridan. He's an international best-selling author, and he's here to talk about his new book, The U Code. So welcome, James.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
My pleasure. So you've got this new book called The U Code. Talk about, what is that book about?
So the U Code is decoding your unique life map that's hidden in your ancient genes. You know the common saying, just to elaborate a little bit more, a leopard can't change its spots. I argue, well, why should a leopard change its spots? I mean, that's seen as like a negative thing, like a cynical thing. You know, that, that's just cynical. You're saying that people were never going to change. I say don't change. I say, why should a leopard, discard its God-given gift of camouflage, its meaning? It gives it its purpose to be a hunter. The mission of my book is to help you find your spots and show you how to best use them in this contemporary jungle. I say, don't change who you are, awaken to it.
I want you to go a little deeper about your book. I've read most of your book. I think it's an amazing book. There's like several sections of the book have to do with genotypes, that have to do with our history of how we got to where we are, why we're not being who we really are, how to get back in touch with it. There's so much in there. So talk a little more about what's in the book and how people are going to benefit from reading it.
So the big question that humans have asked for the last 70,000 years, who am I and why am I here? A lot of great books conclude with that famous quote from the Bible, probably the most succinct and most powerful piece of self-improvement advice ever given, which is know thyself. But then you're left asking, that's great, but how? How do I know myself? You already have half of the answer there. So what I wanted to create, and what the book I know delivers now from working with people on both sides of the Atlantic, different countries as well, thousands of people one-on-one in live events and seminars and so on, is that, I have delivered this, an actual, mechanism for people to follow. 1, 2, 3 steps. Here is how I can know myself. Here I can have the definitive answer. Not a bit of guidance on how to figure this out for yourself. No, the book will tell you, here's who you are. And therefore, on that basis, here is why you're here. I see life as a journey walking down a corridor of choices. Should I turn this to this door on the left or this door on the right? A constant binary choice. Should I marry this person or not? Should I take this job or not? Should I move to this town or not? This constant, and without knowing who we truly are, without having a true life map, our decision making in this corridor of choices, as I call it, is haphazard or non-existent or just plain wrong. Once you know who you are, you're able to all the doors will ping open automatically. Once you know truly who I am and what my purpose is, you have what I call life lucidity. The voices stop. You have this perfect clarity, and that is the road to happiness and consciousness.
So what was the inspiration that got you to write this book? I mean, here you are. You're an amazing person. I may ask you about a little bit about your past in a moment. But you've been an airline pilot, you've been a professional hockey player, you've been someone who was successful in the business world, successful salesman, copywriter, all these things. And all of a sudden now you're writing this incredibly, I think, groundbreaking, transformational book. What got you to do that?
Yeah, I mean, just to rewind before I tell you a second, I'm living proof that, you really can accomplish anything you want in life. But there's only one thing you should. And it was that journey that got me to that point. But then what really triggered this research that you kind of call groundbreaking was, well, I read this book called Chicken Soup for the Soul, written by your good self, the godfather of self-improvement. It's about 10 years ago now, I think. And it was obviously full of, wonderful stories that, have changed a lot of people's lives. But for me personally, there was this boom moment. There was this one story in Chicken Soup for the Soul that just leapt out of the page, and it's like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do something with this. And it's the story about the golden Buddha, which I'll just try and précis for you real quickly. But, is that the story of how there was a 2-ton, I think, large solid gold Buddha. I mean, you tell the story best. And the Burmese army were invading, and the Thai monks wanted to disguise this treasure from the invading army, so they covered it in mud. Years later, it's covered in clay, and they couldn't figure out why it's so heavy. Turns out that this is a solid gold Buddha underneath. And then that's an interesting story in itself. But then, Jack, you finish it with this wonderful metaphor where you say, how we all have this golden Buddha inside ourselves, and how on top, which is what I would call our nature, or our biological self. And then on top of that, we have this mud and this clay, which is the nurture, or the biographical self, that I would call it. And you said, you really hit the nail on the head there, was if we could all just remove this clay that we've acquired during our lives as our nurture, underneath we would find this beautiful golden Buddha, and there we'd find our true selves. And that was it. That was that moment. We're like, no, that's it. I have to figure out a way for people, a definitive guide to crack off that mud, not just have to deal with it like most people have to with, lots of therapy and treatment and stuff like that. Stop, playing with the clay. When you can find your true self, the golden Buddha inside just cracks off all that, and it all just dissolves, and it's just you, the beautiful, deep, true you shining out from underneath.
Now, you talk about the ancient code of the different kinds of, being, the different essences of our true nature. And I found that fascinating. I looked at, there were 7 codes for women, 7 for men. And I discovered kind of who I was. And I have to say, it wasn't the easiest thing to read, that there were some parts of me I go, yeah, I am that, I am that, I am that. Well, I'm not so sure I like the fact that I am that. But you talk about there's the kind of evolved aspect of it and maybe not so evolved aspect of it. But I found it really powerful to get these distinctions. And once you realize who you are, then you're no longer resisting it. You don't have to be like somebody else, but you can just truly surrender and actually be yourself and become the fully manifested aspect of that. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, well, that actually is the real crux of it, Jack, is that when you start looking, for the golden Buddha, in my research, it turns out that there are actually 14 different golden Buddhas, as it were, 14 true selves in these, and you say 7 for male, 7 for female. And they are actually what this is, and it is an ancient cloned template of these personality frameworks. And it's like these ingrained and interrelated traits that all stem from one, what I call a dominant driver that defines that individual. We've been around, humans have been around for 2.5 million years now, and we have a long, very long ancient lineage of acting a certain way, basically as, hunter-gatherer foragers, before we got to this very, very modern state we're in right now. For 99% of human existence, we were, foraging tribes. And so I'm actually building on the work of one of the most famous psychologists of all time, Carl Jung, who back in 1916 explained that what he calls the collective unconscious is the sum of the psychic occurrences that have happened to humans as in our lengthy ancient past. And the nature that we have that stems from the ancient past is not developed, but rather inherited. These are his words. And this is it gets really interesting that Jung said these inherited forms, these personality templates are inherited, and they are pre-existent, these pre-existent forms. And Sigmund Freud picked up on this as well, as he cited what he called archaic remnants in his patients, images that couldn't never have possibly that patient. They don't belong there at all. They belong to this ancient past. And, Jung concurred with Freud when he explained that, these are what he calls frequent and momentous imprints, memory imprints from our ancient past. with the benefit of, modern genetics as we have now, I've simply taken what we know about anthropology, genetics, this Carl Jung, psycho theory that is really spot on, and blended all this together, all these pieces of the puzzle, and taken a big picture view from the self-improvement perspective. And like I said, it works so well. It nails people the way I presented it in the book. And that was really the trick, was taking all this information and presenting it in a way so that a person, without me being in the room, could, quickly identify themselves. And as you rightly picked up on, the trick is to, everyone's got these good and bad points, and we don't always like what we see in the mirror. And then, delivering that as well,
Well, I think what I love about what you just said is that I think you talked about this is encoded in our DNA. And when we try to be something that's not the encoding that's in our DNA, we're doomed to not be fulfilled, not be fully happy, and not to actually play out the path that we're supposed to really follow and get to the end of the yellow brick road, as it were, because the DNA and the encoding from this ancient genetic pattern has been there for literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, whereas all this clay that's on top of the Buddha is rather recent. And so it's kind of not, it's a losing game.
And 100%, that's it. It's this whole, we have this nature-nurture argument, and this is really the defining thing, is the golden Buddha and the mud on top. What I call is the true self. There's your nature, your biological self, as I put it, which is made up of genes, as opposed to your nurtured false self, if you like, which is made of ego. And that's really where the classic human duality that we've really had some 70,000 years, really since the cognitive revolution. And this is even portrayed on cave painting walls. And one of them I put in my book to illustrate this point. It's intrigued writers, the human condition of duality, everything from, the Incredible Hulk to characters like Gollum in Lord of the Rings,
So there are these archetypal stories, if you will, that have been played out in history, whether through mythology, through some of the movies that have become classics, that, timeless movies like The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland and Star Wars and so forth, that show this journey of each of us trying to follow our yellow brick road to get to the true essence of what we're here to do. Now, I may have taking you off path a little bit by asking you that last question I asked, but I want to go back to the idea that your book is about helping people discover that there is this golden Buddha that's who they really are, and the clay that's on it. And if you want to say more about how your book helps people accomplish getting rid of the clay and returning to being the essence that they are.
Yeah, it really comes back to this book helps you, and it's a total life map. So it has to include things such as that do still relate to our ancient genes, such as, health and money and relationships and so on. But really because the big questions we ask, the real big part of our life map that really defines everything else we do in life, relationships, health, money even, comes back to that big question, who am I and why am I here? And that the genotype really is a short for what I've called these genetic types. These 14, 7 female, 7 male. And the hard work really over the last 6 years has been testing on people live, coming up, perfecting this mechanism that I can use. It's a lot easier with you and me in the room, but then it's translating that into an experience when I'm not in the room and there's just you in this book, coming up, presenting the breakdown of these 14 different genotypes in such a way that it has to. Here's the real trick, Jack, is as you well know, the ego is trying to constantly work against us and, protect us from something we really don't want to be protected from anymore now that we're adults. And the trick is you've got to tiptoe around the ego to try and allow you to find yourself, to find that golden Buddha without, waking the ego up. So I had to lay out these each of these genotypal profiles, and you, in the book, one of the first things you do is you come across all 14. You're going to have to read them all and figure yourself out, and your ego is going to be working against you there, because as you rightly picked up on, it doesn't always like when it finds what it sees in the mirror. It doesn't want you. It sounds strange, but there's really this inner battle going on between you, because the ego is trying to protect you from this personal truth that I'm trying to give you to set your spirit free. So that was really I think anyway, and you be the judge, how it accomplishes that was the way that they're presented, and little tricks like, for example, what would the classic thing, what would other people say about you? We tend to we tend to find a more truthful answer when we're asked what would other people say about you, as opposed to what would I say about myself, because then that's one trick. Actually the shaman would play the ritual of this really what is a rite of passage. In ancient times, would be his trick is to, kind of hypnotism, actually, to try and, as I say, tiptoe around the ego.
Mm-hmm. Well, I fortunately, I got to read an advanced reader's copy of your book. I find it a fascinating book. I really do use the word groundbreaking. I think there's some new insights that you have that have not been had by anyone else before. And I think it's really a liberating book if you read it, for really taking the clay off the Buddha, as you said, and don't get caught on the Buddha, taking the clay off the inner Christ, the inner essence of who you are, however you want to hold that. And so I really encourage everybody to get a copy and read it. So given that it's not out yet, when can people buy a copy, and where do they go to do that?
So it's out in January 2021, and it'll be in all bookstores and obviously Amazon as well.
Well, very good. Well, I really encourage people to read this. I think it's a wonderful book. I thank you for the incredible amount of energy you had to expend to do all this research and do all this thinking and have the intellectual and the transformational breakthroughs that you've had. You're a courageous explorer, and appreciate your both writing the book and also being on this show.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you for the initial inspiration.
You're very, very welcome. All right, everybody, that's this week's episode of Conversations with Authors. Please tune in next week. We'll have another wonderful person that can help you take your life to the next level.